All right, welcome everybody to week one. Wanted to come on here and make a video to be able to submit for you guys to have just to kind of go over some material. I keep looking at the wrong way to look at the camera, but anyway. So one of the things I like to do with these videos is just go over the week and provide some feedback, just my own thoughts from a social worker standpoint of having been in the field for over 10 years. And so yeah, so just go assignment by assignment, just really looking at it, and if there's things that really pop up that I have, some thoughts on, or individuals might have questions about it, they look ahead, which I encourage you to do, to look ahead to your different assignments week to week. So anyway, so without further ado, most of the times we start with a devotion, which we didn't tonight. So just wanted to start with a word of prayer. Father, I thank you for the students this week, things that they might be experiencing as they start this course. I pray that you will give strength and courage and wisdom to continue to fight through this field of learning, just this time of learning, this field that is so important to those who are hurting, that we're called to serve. In Jesus' name, amen. So, let me mute my, sorry about that. Let me mute my computer so you don't hear any other emails or anything pull up. All right, so Journal 1.1 is what we start with tonight. And it really starts off by just really looking at the NASW Code of Ethics. So you may or may not have learned about the Code of Ethics in your last class. So when we look at the Code of Ethics, the Code of Ethics has been around for a while. So National Association of Social Workers. One of the things that individuals might not necessarily know is that the National Association of Social Workers is the largest social work association in the country. You are not, just because you're a social worker doesn't necessarily mean you're a part of the NASW. It's a member organization. And with the memberships each year that you pay dues on, some money goes to the national office, which is in Washington, D.C., which does a lot of political action around different human rights and human justice bills that might go through. At the state level here in Indiana, I've served on the board of directors for a term with the NASW here in Indiana. I think it's a great organization to be a part of. I think it provides a lot of feedback, a lot of good opportunities for young social workers to grow and network. But early on, the association developed the NASW Code of Ethics, and one of the things that they talked about is the right to the human right aspect. So I forgot I was going to pull that up before I started recording. I apologize. Give me 2 seconds here. So Journal 1.1 just really starts to talk about the Declaration of Human Rights. Really interesting information about the Declaration of Human Rights and what that looks like globally. So I think World War II is definitely a pivotal time in our world's history. Never before had there been a war on that global of a level. And one of the things that came out of that is just, especially if you think about all of the Jews that were killed because of their religion, it's devastating, right? And so one of the things that was really just one of the things that really kind of came out of World War II is just how much hatred there can be in the world. And so what rights do we have as human beings? And really developing that. So if you think about slavery was only ended here in the United States, less than 150 years. That's not long. That's not a long time. It's really 2 generations, 3 generations worth of families. Some great grandparents might still be living that experienced some of the Jim Crow laws of the South. And so if you think about some of the human rights issues that go on here in the country, they're not new. They're not anything that I don't think that it's been experienced before. Thing about Ireland, it just looks different, right? Protestant versus Catholics, that the fight that goes on in Northern Ireland between religions, the Crusades. So, war has been something that has gone on really since Cain and Abel, essentially. And I think the identification of human rights as a global society is huge for us to establish and identify that we all have those rights, right? So if you look at the Code of Ethics, I did get that pulled up. One of the things is ethical principles. So there are different values and principles that drive what we do as social workers. And one value is service, and the ethical principle states that social workers' primary goal is to help people in need and to address social problems. And what does that look like? So I think from a micro level standpoint, and you'll hear this throughout your schooling, micro, meso, and macro. When you look at it from a micro level standpoint, the service aspect of this ethical principle is to meet people one-on-one where they're at, meet families, meet individuals, whatever that might look like. So just that one-on-one individual touch. If you look at it from a meso standpoint, you could be looking at it from groups, how do groups, so the Rotary Club, Lions Club, churches, things like that. How do groups meet the needs of people? And then from a macro level standpoint, how do cities, how do countries, how do states, how do counties, how do townships? Macro is just that big overarching, system, big overarching system that can play a part in what service looks like. So the big thing, 2 things I wanted to actually after service, gets into social justice. So the ethical principles that social workers challenge social injustice through voting, through picketing. If you look at the days of Jane Addams in Chicago, who's kind of the mother of social work, if you will, she organized. She brought in immigrants in the south side of Chicago, west side of Chicago, I guess. If you've never been to Whole House in Chicago, I highly suggest going. It's just fun history to go to. Still standing where she where she did a lot of her work. So she took in immigrants at that point in time, a lot of Hispanics, a lot of Germans, a lot of Irish. So looking at the European immigrants that weren't necessarily looked favorably at that time. But social justice is something that, as social workers, we really try to focus on. And again, I think we look at it from a micro standpoint. When we look at social justice, how do we work with the underprivileged in our community one-on-one to promote social justice? If someone's being treated unfairly, how do we get them connected to lawyers that can provide the legal aspect that they might need? From a macro level standpoint, obviously that's through policies, through procedures, changing laws, things like that. If you're looking at the dignity, and then the next thing is dignity and worth of the person. This has, all of that written all over it, all of the idea of the global human rights, right? So the dignity of worth of a person, everybody is created with dignity. And I love this about social work. This is the one thing I love most about social work, is the identity that we are all created equal. I think we say that a lot in this country, in the United States, that, we are created equal, but we are, but it doesn't get played out that way. Me as a white male in America have privileges, and I just have to call it what it is. Have privileges is that maybe a female, African American female doesn't have, a Hispanic female doesn't have. And one of the things I often say is I can't apologize for the fact that I won the genetic lottery code. But I can do something with the power that I have essentially been given by society. I can speak up for injustices. I can show dignity and worth in any individual, regardless of sex, religion, color of their skin, nationality, language, whatever. As a white male in America, I have the opportunity to provide that feedback and be able to love those and show dignity and worth of everyone. So then it also talks about importance of human relationships. This is huge. I think as social workers, this is one thing I've really tried to hit really hard in the work that I do. So I run a permanent supportive housing program for chronically homeless individuals, funded through HUD. And, I find that relationship is tough for these individuals. They often don't know how to make friends. The friends that they do have, they abandon essentially when we place them in an apartment, and then we expect them to be housed. And so one of the things that I've really tried to focus on is how do I build that relationship aspect within the clients that I work with and help them in the community. So that's just a few things within this code of ethics. I'll probably touch on them off and on throughout this course, because I think from an ethical standpoint, it's really important for students to understand how to ethically provide care and service throughout their practice, and to learn it early. So I've been rambling a little bit. I appreciate you guys hanging in there on this. So Readings looks at the multidimensional approach and outlines the basic of social systems. And then chapter 2, we're looking at delves right into the various theoretical perspectives. So one of the things that in chapter 2 I really want to hit on, I don't have the book in front of me at the moment, but when you're looking at at different theoretical perspectives, one of the things that makes social work so unique is that we pull from psychology, we pull from sociology, we pull from science, anthropology, we pull from all those different types of studies of human behavior and pull it all into one. And so when you're looking at systems theory is probably the biggest. So kind of two theories, if you will, perspectives that really kind of go together here. So systems theory is probably the biggest one that we really talk about. And it's such a huge part of what we do. So this class is called Human Behavior in the Social Environment. And one of the things that I think that sets social workers apart from psychology majors or sociology majors is that they look at human behavior, but they often look at it from a very isolated standpoint. They don't see how policy impacts the work that we do. They don't see how the macro system plays a huge role into the lives of the individuals that we work with. One example of this, and I just had a conversation with my supervisor about this, is that we have an individual that we're working with who just processes in and out of jail. In and out of jail. It's just a cycle. And so he has a sex offense. He's a lifetime sex offender on the registry. He suffers from schizophrenia, and he drinks mouthwash as his alcoholic drink of choice. If you're new to social work, new to substances, you probably didn't know you can get drunk on alcohol on mouthwash, but you can, and it's pretty nasty. So cycles in and out. So, we look at, if you want to look at the human behavior and you want to look at systems theory, how does the macro, if a person's always getting arrested, right? If an individual individual stays intoxicated and suffers from hallucinations, but resists law enforcement because he doesn't think anything's wrong with him, as a system, are we failing that guy? Because we're arresting someone who may or may not be causing problems, but because he doesn't look like the normal person that's standing outside of a grocery store, then what are we doing? What does the system do for that person? Or if we as a federal government, decide that we're going to abolish the Affordable Care Act, because we don't want to have to mandate that people get insurance, but because of that policy, so many underprivileged or underpaid individuals were able to then qualify for health insurance and take care of their medical needs. What's the system working like for them? How are we impacting that? And so one of the things that's really important to understand from a systems theory, and most of it, if you think about it from a science standpoint, the ecosystem, right? So there's grass, and the worms eat the grass, and then the birds eat the grass or eat the worms, and then I don't know what eat birds. So cats eat the bird, and the dog eats the cat, and then the cat, and I don't know who eats the dog. Maybe if you're I don't know. If you're hungry, I guess you can eat a dog. But that's the ecosystem, right? So if something is impacted in that ecosystem, ecological system, if something's so the same goes for social systems, right? Think about a family system. If an individual, and I worked with dads for a long time, if a dad is arrested and taken out of the house, how does that impact the mom who is now single and has to work multiple jobs in order to survive? And then, so one example is we had a gentleman who had child with a woman while they were on the streets. They were in a shelter together. We had them housed in an apartment together. Mom suffered from a cocaine use disorder, and decided she wanted to abandon the family. And she ended up leaving the house. Dad was left to care for the child. He had no income. He had been denied Social Security. He did suffer from bipolar disorder with psychotic symptoms. So meaning that he suffered from hallucinations or delusions or whatever it might be with that psychosis. And so he didn't have childcare, but yet he couldn't afford to properly care for the child without government assistance. So he couldn't afford childcare. He couldn't work enough. He couldn't work and make enough money to pay for childcare and pay for his apartment on his own with the mental health diagnosis, but yet he was denied for disability. So what are we doing from a systems perspective? How are we helping this person? What are things within the micro, meso, and macro levels that are really impacting him? And so that's one thing I really want you guys to get on this with, or to take from this. I know that the online learning can be somewhat difficult at times in being self-taught. That's why I'm spending a little bit more time on this, because it's so huge as to what we do as social workers, the person in the environment, what's going on. So I'm going to get off my soapbox on this for just a second and look at the discussion question. This article is fantastic. This is absolutely fantastic information. Really gets you thinking about how Latino families are impacted and what's the impact of the child welfare system. If an individual is undocumented with children here in the United States, are they getting their needs met? because they're flying under the radar. They don't want to be seen. They don't want to be heard. They don't want to be known because they don't want to be deported, right? And so aside from trying to learn the language, moving to a whole new culture, they are also trying to fly under the radar so they're not found out, because they want to make a better life for their families. So from a systems perspective, how can the child welfare system, instead of coming in and saying you're a bad parent, how could the system, a state system, come in and work with undocumented individuals and help them either A, become legal, or B, address the needs that they have, and then and go from there. So I know immigration issues have been on the forefront of conversation since this administration came into presidency. And so actually it's been before that. I think Obama addressed it. I think Bush at one point, President Bush a couple years ago, 10 plus years ago, I guess now at this point, 15 years ago, at one point said that undocumented individuals take the jobs that most Americans don't want to do anymore. And so if you think about it from that perspective, undocumented individuals make our country go round. They do the jobs that nobody wants to do. And so how can that migration and acculturation be impacted by different types of laws or systems or whatever that case might be? So really, I'll be really interested to seeing what you guys had to say through that discussion topic. The podcast, this is fantastic. I listened to this the other day in preparation for this course, and I really appreciate what this lady has to say. I'd never done it, never seen the culturogram, but I think it's fascinating, because I think what's happened in the United States is we have assimilated so much that it is difficult sometimes to really identify what's your culture, right? So me as a white American, I pardon me, I don't even know where my ancestors came from. We didn't inherit many things. Things weren't passed down from one culture to another or one generation to another about the culture. And so, I think one of the things that's really fascinating that Dr. Congress talks about is really identifying, even if it's a mainstream person, like if you're working with a white, a white person, I'll say mainstream white, I guess. If you're working with someone who seems normal, I guess, and you're not sure why they're referred to you, it's still important to figure out culture, because what if you don't know, right? What if you don't know? What if there's things going on with them that it would be very impactful for you and how you work with them, and identify that. So we end week 1 with the Dropbox current social issues. In the book, Christianity and Social Work, Readings into Integration of Christian Faith and Social Work Practice. We talk about integrating the Christian faith and social work practice, HIV and AIDS. This is such a very fascinating topic, I think, for Christians, because I remember growing up. I remember being in elementary school, and Ryan White was huge. All the information or all the media focusing on Ryan White. And so the question is, how might the church respond to the situation in ways that reflect Christian principles? I think this chapter brings out so many different thoughts for me. And so just for me in general, when I shared this in my introductory video, I kind of think somewhat outside of the box. And to be honest with you, one thing that I've really come to love and appreciate about a pastor I follow on podcast, Greg Boyd is his name. I don't know if anybody's heard of him. But one thing he talks about is in the Sermon on the Mount. One thing that Jesus says is that the Father's love is like the sun. The sun doesn't choose where it's going to shine; it just shines. And the rain, the Father's love is like rain. It doesn't choose who it's going to fall on; it just falls. And so I think one of the things that, for me, the way that I see this and how I respond to this question, how might the church respond to the situations, the traumas that it experiences, the social issues that result, right? So I think the sharing of needles, right? That's one. I think we could automatically go to the homosexuality. I think that was one thing that early on in the AIDS epidemic was really thought about. It was a gay man's disease. And so it's really had a stigma ever since. But what if you contract it? What if you contract it from a needle by accident? I don't know how it happens, to be honest with you. But what if a child's born with AIDS and is passed down from one generation to another? What if a person has AIDS because they were a cocaine they used cocaine and they turn their life around, and now they have AIDS, right? So this is, to me, I don't really care how you got it. I just want to love you. I just want to love you and help you through the traumatic experiences that led up to you contracting this awful disease. And so I think, if you really think about it, for me, our job is to love, not question, and not judge. That's God is the one that judges. My job is to love, because that's what Jesus has called me to. So I will be interested to see how you guys respond to this. Wow, 26 minutes. So I appreciate you guys listening today. I hope I shared something to you that was beneficial in your journey as you continue to explore this social work field. And if you definitely need anything, feel free to reach out. I am always available. So peace and enjoy.